Yeah, I think we should get started, and we want to use your time wisely, and there's a lot to cover today, so welcome. We've got people still coming in the waiting room, and they can join us as they come in. But gosh, it's good to see everyone. I know we're all on Zoom, but it's always a new mix of faces. So welcome to today's MACC Zoom In. I'm Laurel Hansen, MACC's Program Manager. I'm joined by Claire Owen, MACC's Communications Director, and we're very happy to be here with you today. This is MACC Zooms In on liability, safety, risk management. This is the evolving landscape of COVID, and our conversation may cover a lot of different ground depending on your interests and questions that come up. So, but we really want to talk about where we are now and how things are evolving. This convening continues the series of Zoom sessions where we bring members together during these what have been difficult times. We listen to our members and convene them around the issues that matter to them. And while each of our members has a distinct voice in the community, the MACC network is united by a belief that we have a greater impact when we partner and connect. So on behalf of your network, MACC, thank you so much for being here. All right, so here's a little bit of our plan for today, our virtual agenda. As I mentioned, a few things to acknowledge at the front end, and then we'll introduce our special guest. We'll have time for discussion. We saved a little time for member open mic, should you want to share how things are going with you and your organizations, and then we'll wrap up. If we wrap up early, you'll get a few minutes back at the end of your day. So that's today's plan for the next hour. But before we get started quickly, I'd like to call out a special feature. You've heard me talk about Ask MACC before. You'll find it on MACC's website. Ask MACC, it's your easy button for technical assistance to get questions answered. This is exclusively for MACC members. So this is a special opportunity. You can learn from frequently asked questions that other members have brought up. We publish those on Ask MACC. You can also ask questions of your own. So this is where you can have access to any of the subject matter experts in MACC's different areas. And we know that during the pandemic, there are always new questions and new demands that come up. And our team is ready to help. The MACC folks are at your service. We're here for you. So yeah, use Ask MACC. These Zooms are another form of technical assistance and all part of the Ask MACC platform. All right. So we think it's important to do a land acknowledgement as we start our time together. And so we're going to begin today by first acknowledging and honoring the truth of the journey to where we are today. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations who have come before. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land for more generations than can be counted. Honesty and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers difference creates. So wherever you're located within the Twin Cities, most likely, we are on the stolen lands of the Dakota people. We pay respect to their elders past and present. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, slavery, migration, and settlement that is a part of the journey to today. Thank you. I also want to take a minute to recognize today's special sponsor. We have a number of awesome sponsors. You've probably seen their logos on our Zoom invitations, but today we wanted to highlight one of our sponsors, Asset HR. And I did invite our sponsor to join us. And if they're on the call, please make sure you unmute yourself, give us a wave, and we'll introduce you. But I do want to mention a little bit about Asset HR, one of our great sponsors. They're a family-owned human capital management firm, and they provide all sorts of services. And I know they have a office in Apple Valley, and we're just really pleased to have their local support and the support of the work that we do. So thank you, Asset HR. And if you come on to this Zoom at any point, we're happy to give you a shout out. So make sure you chat me up or give us a wave and we'll introduce you. Thanks again to Asset HR. All right, we have so many great attendees who registered for today's session from all of these amazing MACC members. Obviously, we don't have time to do full introductions, but we do want to showcase you and thank you for being a part of these Zoom conversations. And you're also welcome to introduce yourself in chat if you're feeling chatty, or if you're new to these Zooms, we'd love to meet you there as well. Thank you for coming today. All right. We are getting into the meat of things here, and I'm sure that Zooming is in your blood now, but just remember you do have the options within Zoom to raise your hand. We start you on mute just to eliminate background noise, but we do want this to be an engaging conversation. So feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, and then also use chat. You can use chat if you need help. You can also just use chat to comment. What do you think about what you're hearing? What questions are coming up? Raise hand and chat, those are your options. And of course, view control, I'm sure everyone realizes you can look at speaker view. You know, you've got the shared slide deck for this session, but you can also flip to gallery view, which is also really neat when you want to see the whole audience. So as we move around, you can change your views as well. All right. We thought we would throw some polls in today because we're curious how things are going for you. I posed a few poll questions, so we'd like to launch those, but it also helps our special guest today get to know you a little bit better. So I think I posted 5 polls, and Clara is going to help us launch those. You answer them in real time, and then as the poll closes, you get to see kind of how everyone responded to those poll questions. So let's give that a try. Poll question number 1. Do you feel like your operations have started to return to normal? And you define return to normal for yourself. All right. So not everyone, a split decision on question number 1.
I love it.
Poll question number 2 is coming next. Has your organization recently reopened more in-person services? So this is a little bit of a progress report. And of course, it's all relative to your doing in-person services. So. All right, about half and half there. So some folks have started reopening, and for some that might still be on the horizon. All right, next poll question. How difficult has it been for your team to adjust to the changing landscape of the pandemic? Pretty darn hard, but we've got this pretty smooth, easy peasy. Yeah, it's hard to remember that things just have been changing constantly for the last year. Every day is like, what's this day going to bring? It's hard to remember there was a time maybe where we didn't feel like that quite as much. But. All right. We got a lot of confidence in this room, in this audience. Hard, but we've got this was definitely the predominant. And I knew that 0% would say easy peasy, because really, how could it be? All right, we're moving on to our 4th question next. What percentage of your employees do you estimate have been fully vaccinated? Less than 25%, 25 to 50, around half, more than half, almost everyone. Looks like a mix, but around half is what you're estimating. And our last poll question, which is something I threw in there. because it was new to me. Do you have a vaccine policy? And again, that's how you define what vaccine policy means. Yeah, most people don't. So maybe we'll touch on that today, or at least that topic that could inform a formal or informal version of that. Great, thank you so much for participating in our poll questions. It's fun to get a glimpse into what you're thinking and doing. And I think that helps our special guest as well get to know you a little bit. I'm gonna move on now and introduce our special guest. I'm so glad she's here. Erica Weber. Hi, Erica Weber. Erica joined Brown and Carlson law firm back in November 2016. She graduated from Lawrence University and received her JD from Marquette University. She's admitted to practice in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Colorado, so she can get around, as well as federal courts. Erica practices in the areas of employment and labor law, workers' compensation, personal injury defense. She has diverse expertise, so I think we have a great fit for our conversation today. And she's really just been really generous in sharing her time with us here today. So let's bring Erica up, and I know she's around somewhere.
I'm right here.
There's Erica. We feel free, I might pop you over into speaker view. Yeah, that's a great way to see you, Erica. Thank you again for being here. I wanted to welcome you. Hello, and give you an opportunity to maybe make a little opening statement, say a little bit about what you're thinking and feeling today, and help us get to know you.
Absolutely. It's great to be here this afternoon. A little bit more of my background, just for those of you who have not met me before. I have been a lawyer for 26 years. I have been both in-house counsel and working in private practice, giving employment advice for the majority of the time on that, but also doing some insurance defense work as well. So, and I have also been licensed in California, although I'm in on inactive status. Thank you very much for that, because California has crazy laws when it comes to employees, for those of you that have ever had to look into that at all. So I'm a little bit grateful to be out of the California legal constructs, but it's been very interesting. I have not enjoyed the pandemic. I am still at home. We have been at home since we shut down in March of last year. Like most people, our office is still trying to figure out if they're going to have some sort of vaccine policy or how to get us all back. But my bosses have been happy to keep us all. We've got a system worked out at home, and they're happy to keep us there until they figure out what they want to do as far as keeping people vaccinated. We are allowed in the office, but we have the sign-in procedures. We have the self-disclosure form we have to fill out if we're in during work hours. And for everyone in our office who is in a cubicle situation, you're not allowed to come in if your neighbor cubicle person is there at the same time. So it's being coordinated so that we don't have people sitting within 6 feet of each other. Do the best that we can. We of course have employees that are out there posting that, heck no, I shouldn't have to wear a mask at work, and if they try and tell me to do that, I'm going to quit my job, and all the usual things. So you know, I think everybody's kind of dealing with all the same issues right now. I did tell Laurel when we started talking about how this hour was going to go, I can't talk to you for an hour about COVID laws. And the reason for that is simple. The law has not caught up to our pandemic situation. We've got a few laws out there that impact work comp claims, and there are some laws that sort of frame our structure of how we look at things. But ultimately, the best thing that all lawyers can tell you right now is, well, we can give you our best practices, we can give you our best advice based on what we know right now, but the world has never seen a worldwide pandemic where everyone has worked together to try and deal with it. When we had the influenza in 1918, they did not come out with an immediate vaccination that could be used worldwide. So we've never had a situation really that we've been looking at where there might be lawsuits that could be brought up in reaction to how employers choose to address COVID concerns. So we can give you all our best advice, but it comes with a caveat that this could change. The legislature could choose to take some sort of action that would then change the laws, and that could be both the state legislature and our national legislature. So I will do the best I can to help guide you here today, but it all comes with the caveat that we all have to keep our ears on the ground and pay attention to what's going on, because our legislators can pass laws that might try and affect that. And then of course they will go into the courts where they will fight it, and it'll be years before we know how this truly shakes out. There are only a handful of lawsuits out there right now in the United States that are addressing requiring vaccines at the employment locations. So, those are in such early stages, we don't even know where those are going yet. We can all take our guesses and say what we think will probably happen, but that's sort of the best we can do right now. So that's the caveat that arches over our discussion today. But Laurel and I were hoping that there would be quite a few questions, because again, I can't sit there and say, here's what the law tells us we have to do. So I do not have an hour's worth of talking.
Yeah. Well, nor would we make you do that. But, I think that's interesting context where you say it might be years before we really understand this. And I suppose that's the nature of how law works.
Unfortunately, yeah, law is a very slow process. As anyone who's been involved with a lawsuit, I can't tell you how many times I've called an employer and said, I need to now talk with someone about what happened with Joe Smith back in 2019. And they say, that's still around? I hadn't heard from anyone. I thought it was done. I'm like, no, you'll hear when it's done, but it's just such a slow process.
Well, Erica, thanks again for being here. I really appreciate it. And we were eager to have this time and conversation with you today. And I'll mention that we've got 41 people on this Zoom. So clearly this is a topic. We have 55 members, member organizations at MACC, human service, mostly Twin Cities, but all Minnesota nonprofit organizations. So to have 41 of our members here is really an indicator that this is a topic of interest. We know we've all navigated and we've survived in this way, this pandemic, and I think we might all be on the same page that post-COVID is going to be the next normal, maybe not the return to what we thought normal was before. I just kind of think about that in a big picture too. Have you been thinking about how COVID might continue to reshape the workplace, or just in your general perspective as somebody that works with human resource people?
Honestly, my very first thought when I was coming up with my thoughts on this is an employer I have who works for a bunch of buildings downtown. Their business is working in all the office buildings. And I spoke with her about 3 months ago, and she told me how many people had left their offices, were presumed not to be coming back. And I was thinking as I drove away the last day from my office in March, I was one of the last employees that went to working in my home instead of my office before we shut down completely. And I was driving past all these office buildings with empty parking lots in the middle of the afternoon. And I remember thinking, I wonder if this is ever even going to come back to the office structure that we all know and are familiar with. Because once they send us home, I mean, they're saving a ton not feeding me coffee at the office every day. So, they get us all set up at home. A lot of people are choosing to just keep their employees at home.
Yeah, we'll see. It's definitely sped up trends in business, hiring, consumer behavior. It's such a moment in time to see a fast change like this. We don't usually see change occur quite this fast. and yeah, it'll be very curious to see what will be retained in the workplace. And the old model of business in general, existed throughout the whole 1900s, right? It was leave your home,
Right.
go to work, spend your 9 to 5, complete your obligations, and this has really been a first societal shakeup, or at least a very recent and impactful shakeup. So the other thing that comes to mind before we jump into the nitty gritty of all what we have quite a few questions, especially about vaccine. I think about it too with the pandemic has really put I think a focus on mental health, and in particular as employees in the workplace, and how workplaces are really getting a glimpse at the demands and stresses that employees are under, especially during this pandemic. Child care, elder care, personal health, all of these things. And I don't know if law ever touches on that experience that both the employer and the employees are having, just those daily complexities and demands on workers' lives. And I feel like we know so much more about each other on the other side of this pandemic.
Well, and it's tricky, right? Because I saw someone on there said that they were here mostly to look for guidance on a vaccine policy. And it's the same with mental health, trying to deal with employees who are at home and what questions you can actually legally ask them and not. There are still all the protections in place. My number one thing to employers would be, you can't call up an employee and say, hey, Laurel, how's your mental health? Are you doing okay? You can kind of do a check-in, but you have to be so careful not to be too intrusive into their private medical situations. And you can't ask questions that might elicit something that would be protected, say, by the American with Disabilities Act. So it's pretty much a tight wire rope when you're in a situation where all your employees are working remotely. You're trying to touch base and know what's going on with them, and yet probably not the best thing to do to call up and say, hey, Laurel, have you seen a psychiatrist in the past month? So it is rather a difficult tightrope I think employers are having to walk these days, made harder by the fact that they're not seeing their employees in the office.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that it's going to take a long time to really flesh out everything. And, so everyone's trying to make their best judgments. Liability was certainly one of the things that we thought in risk management that people would want to talk about. And, I guess we might want to hear from you, like, what should organizations really just need to be aware of? What are those top best practices through the lens of this pandemic?
Yeah, so for a vaccine policy perspective, I think the best way to put it is, I'll just talk generally and then have people jump in if they have more specific questions. The number one question, can I require my employees to take a vaccine? Yes. I mean, you pretty much always can. Should you? That would be a slightly different question. There are no laws that say you cannot require a vaccine, particularly if you have a business justification for it. And my preference with all my clients when I talk with them is you need to have a good justification as to why you're requiring the vaccine. Would it make sense for my employer to say, Erica, you work at home 24/7, you don't have to come into the office unless you choose to, we're requiring you to go get the vaccine? That doesn't really make sense, because I'm not in a position at my office where I'm exposing other people. If I were a healthcare provider working on a COVID ward, of course it makes sense. If I'm a physical therapist or a dental technician where my face is inches from somebody else's face, then I have a much stronger business justification. The businesses that most lawyers feel really comfortable saying, yeah, you're good to say that you're required to be vaccinated, are in the healthcare industry. If you have a factory type environment or environment where all your workers have to be shoulder to shoulder. Schools are actually the only business in the state of Minnesota where there's state legislation that says that they can require vaccines. And so they can require it of the students there. There's pretty strong argument they can require it of the teachers there should they choose to do so. Are there exceptions to that? Of course, because it's the law, and it wouldn't be law if there weren't exceptions to all the rules. So most people are aware there can be a legitimate religious justification for why someone chooses not to be vaccinated. And it can't be, I just don't believe in vaccines. But if they have a legitimate belief and faith that the vaccine should not occur, there is a legitimate basis for them to say, I need an exception to your requirement to a vaccine for that. So some religions are against medical care, and you can't tell someone they have to disavow their legitimate religious belief and get vaccinated to come to work.
Yeah.
Also,
Hmm?
oh, sorry.
Oh, continue.
I was just going to say also the other main exception to that is medical. So people do have allergies to ingredients that are in the vaccines. And if you have a legitimate medical reason, or your doctor has given you a note saying you should not be vaccinated for whatever reason, that would be a legitimate medical reason, and it would be a violation of the ADA to require somebody to get vaccinated in violation of their medical directives from their doctors. So those are situations where you would then have to look at, is there a workaround for what we can do? Do we need to somehow accommodate it? I'm thinking accommodation. There has been one lawsuit. It was out of Texas. It was a firefighter. They were requiring vaccines. He refused to get it. And they said, okay, you can't get it. I don't recall if he had I believe he did not have a true religious belief, but he tried to say that was why he didn't want it. But not only did they say, fine, you don't want to do it, here are the alternatives we'll propose for you. We'll give you work in some sort of inspection capacity where you work on your own and you're not around other people. I believe it would have been a cut in pay that he would have had to take. Or we can give you you can agree to wear a mask 24/7 when you're on duty, an N95 mask. He refused to do either of those, so they ended up terminating him. And when he tried to sue the employer saying that was a wrongful termination, the court kicked his lawsuit because they said not only, he stated a reason he couldn't do the vaccine, and the employer came up and said, okay, how can we accommodate this? And they considered that, and they actually proposed some reasonable alternatives.
Sure. No, that's a great example. Yeah, the vaccine is definitely the issue of the moment. I think Minnesota, we're just over 2 million fully vaccinated residents. Our population is over 5 million, and younger people are soon to start entering the vaccine process. We have a member, Claudia, with a question. If we require employees to have the vaccine, what do we request in terms of proof?
The number one question I've seen lately, there are the cards, of course, that all of the people providing legitimate vaccines are giving. We can require those, just get a copy of those. There are suspicions that those are going to be relatively easy to fake. And I don't disagree with that, but right now that's what we have. You can require some sort of form from the doctor that would have the person's name on it and the date. Anything related to the COVID vaccine by federal law should be saying where they got it and on what day it was. So people don't just say, I got it on this day. They should be able to provide you some sort of documentation. Or as an employer, you could choose to have some sort of form that the employee fills out, just saying, yes, I was vaccinated. On what day were you fully vaccinated? You've got to keep the questions very simple. You cannot go into, I want all kinds of details like who gave it. You're not entitled to their entire medical history, but you are entitled to say, were you fully vaccinated? Have them give the day on which they were fully vaccinated. Most attorneys would say you can ask them which manufacturer's brand of vaccine they got, because at some point boosters are going to become an issue as to whether or not the vaccine stops being effective. Are booster shots necessary? And then are you going to be following up with them on the employees getting the boosters? And these are all questions you're going to have to consider. As with any employee, if you collect this medical documentation from your employees before they're allowed to come back to work, I would highly recommend you keep it in a separate folder, not in their personnel folder, not out somewhere where anyone has access to the information. I would probably try to limit the number of people in your organization that would have access, because this is medical information on your employees that you are gathering. So you need to treat it as such. You need to keep that in mind.
Excellent point. So the nature of a lot of our member organizations is that they are in the community with visitors from the community. Some of those visitors could be people like myself, or people that work at MACC that are going out to our members, or they could be clients and participants and stakeholders. It seems like the employee stuff is a little more cut and dry, but when you're open to the community and then your employees are engaging with people and you're not tracking medical information on your visitors. So what would you expect would be some best practices that should be continued? Like early on in COVID, it was a little clear, like only if you absolutely need to. And, now it's like we're reopening. So what should we consider?
And I see this from so many angles, because there's not only the danger of your people going out into the community, but it's also the community bringing things back to your people. One of the big reasons I started out saying my office still isn't open yet, my bosses have absolutely no interest in all of us coming back into the office and start infecting each other and having 30% of us out at any given time for 2 weeks or possibly more.
So these are essential frontline work that is helping keep our community going, and also run with volunteers.
Right.
So
right. And you can, the general theory as of right now, everybody's pretty much operating as with any business. You can always say no shirt, no shoes, no service. So if you choose to say we're only working with vaccinated people, or you can only come onto our premises if you're vaccinated, whatever your situation is, you can do that. Tracking that will be a bit of a headache. You will need to ensure that you enforce whatever policy you put in place 100% of the time, 100% of the people. You cannot make exceptions, because as soon as you start making exceptions, you get people saying, why did you let the 40-year-old white man do this, but you wouldn't let the 82-year-old Latina woman? And you open yourself up to claims of discrimination and unequal treatment and disparities. So whatever policy you decide to come in and put into place, you need to make sure you're consistent with it. I see absolutely no problem with requiring people to wear masks if they're either coming onto your property, or you can have your people wear masks, even though they probably don't want to, out in the public, unless and until the Minnesota Department of Health and CDC starts to say otherwise. At some point, you're going to have to take that into consideration too. Hopefully at some point, all of the United States will get to a point where we have herd immunity and we don't need to worry about this as much. But until we do, you're on absolutely solid ground to say, look, when you're on our clock and on our dime, we want you wearing your mask. We want the people you come into contact with wearing masks. We want you to feel comfortable, employees or volunteers that are working for us. So if you're in a situation where someone's not complying with our request that they wear masks, we can ask them to leave. I made an appointment with my eye doctor the other day. They said, we don't care if you're vaccinated or not. We want you wearing a mask when you're in the office. And I said, I have no problem with that, because I understand why they're asking for that at this time. And I do think that's a legitimate practice to put into place right now. Some sort of, we ask you to sanitize your hands when you walk in, or whatever it is that your business has as their comfort level for the requirements.
Yeah. A comment from our member at CAPI. If individuals elect to not vaccinate, are we still able to ask them to mask or double mask or face shield?
Absolutely. Especially, again, you've got to have a good justification for it. If my boss said, Erica, I want you to double face mask and put on a shield while you're sitting in your house alone in your office, that makes no sense.
Not practical. Yep.
So I'm assuming that we're talking about what we're asking them to do when they come onto our premises or come into contact with our people.
Well, we have members that go out into clients' homes too.
Right.
So we don't always control the environment.
Right. Yeah. My sister has that situation right now where they have not restarted their home visit. She also works for a nonprofit with disabled people, and they are not resuming their home visits at this time because of the fact that not everybody's vaccinated and they're not at a comfortable spot yet.
Yeah.
But they're constantly having to revisit this, and we have to constantly kind of check in with the Minnesota Department of Health, see what their recommendations are, and sort of take your clues from them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the thing is like, it's just this constant state of, have we changed yet? Have we moved yet? Are things different? And I mean, that's certainly a good suggestion that the Department of Health is the resource to probably give us that big picture glance of are the metrics changing? Like, is there a practical reason?
Yeah, I'll be saying that repeatedly today. I just think that's a good resource. It's the one that is the state's following their guidelines pretty much right now. So there's absolutely no problem going onto their website and checking to see what their recommendations are. And you're not going to get in trouble saying I followed the State Department of Health recommendations.
Right. Yeah, and let me shout out to the audience too. We'd love to hear kind of what you're doing and where you're at. So we welcome your questions, but if anyone wants to chime in and say, hey, you know, this is where I work, this is the type of organization we are, and here's what we're doing, we sure wouldn't mind hearing from you. So raise your hand or unmute if you'd just be willing to give us a glimpse into your four walls. We're interested in that.
Well, and I just saw in the chat that Trisha was commenting that she has some California organizations that have residential settings with the workers, and she knows they're requiring either a full vaccine or requiring the full PPE. So yeah, I mean, I would agree with that recommendation.
You know, you talk about tracking and record keeping. Like, what are employers doing with that information? Just retaining it, so if they ever need to show that they were consistent, or because I can understand the screening part of it, like you're vaccinated, so maybe you've got a little more leeway for re-entering the work, but like, what is the tracking? Like, we're tracking this.
Employers, I know some of them are tracking the information and doing nothing with it.
Yeah.
Some of them are tracking it and knowing where they have it stored, so that if someone comes down, like Laurel, you and I are in the office at the same time, you come down with a COVID positive diagnosis. I know some employers that are calling everybody that was last in the office on your last day in the office, and they're saying you need to stay home because someone who was in the office when you were in the office has tested positive, so we want you to stay home for 10 days and make sure you have no symptoms before you come back. Or, you know, it's changing now because more people, especially here in Minnesota, are getting vaccinated, as to what the response is to that. But yeah, the reason for tracking is to kind of hopefully make sure that you don't continue to spread it around your organization if someone comes down sick with it. B, if you're going to say, I'm going to have this policy in place and I need the employees to report, well, then you better follow through and be able to say, I had it, we did it, we had every intention of, we sent anyone home who came in and they had a fever, or they came in and reported they were having trouble breathing. And that's a recommendation. If you're going to have people self-report and you're going to be asking, it's not so great to say, hey, do you have a headache? Because honestly, are we going to send home anyone who comes to work with a headache? I used to come to work with headaches in the morning before COVID came on. I'm sure I will do it again at some point before I retire. So a headache's a pretty general symptom. The inability to breathe, a recent coughing issue, the loss of taste and smell, I think seems pretty unique to COVID. If you put those on your questionnaire, instead of having them run through a list of 20 symptoms, you have them run through a few that would be a good indicator that you have already met, or your team of whoever is deciding this policy you're going to have, you guys know and you have a plan in place. What are you going to do if someone has that symptom? I have a client who works at a university. They're doing an in-person graduation. They want to do the temperature test and have a self-report on every guest that comes for the graduation ceremony. And I said to them, well, what are you going to do with that? If someone comes and they tested 100.3, are you sending them home and they hadn't even gotten that far. I don't know why they thought they needed to do the screening when they had no plan in place for what they were going to do with the relatives from, Missouri who flew in for a graduation and have a couple of the symptoms for COVID.
I popped in to visit my mom in assisted living this morning, and I have a key to get into her building, and they just had a stand there with a thermometer, a forehead thermometer, and you would just test yourself, but there was no real, it was like, okay. I mean, it wasn't like there's anybody screening you. So it was just really like, here's some tools and be careful. But yeah, that's a highly vaccinated environment. Good morning to Michelle from Prism. Hi, friend. How you doing? We want to hear from you. Thanks for waving your hand.
Yeah, thanks. So not all of my staff are vaccinated or intend to get vaccinated. So what I'm trying to assess the risk for is what could go wrong? What risk might they pose to anyone else who is vaccinated or not vaccinated? We have got a lot of people who come through our building. And I get there's only so much that we know about the virus. So, I mean, what are some ways that it could possibly go wrong? And then you might have just said this, but I'm not sure. So if someone is vaccinated but exposed to someone who's got COVID, who's not vaccinated, would they still need to quarantine? I guess that's one of the things. If somebody is not vaccinated and they get COVID and they're around all their other coworkers who are vaccinated, do the coworkers still need to quarantine, or are they not? Like, how many ways can this go?
That's a $6 million question. My understanding, and I believe what the Minnesota Department of Health is still saying on this, if you're vaccinated and you're around someone with COVID, you can certainly still carry the virus. You can certainly still get sick yourself. I know a lot of people talk about the vaccine as though I'm vaccinated, so I'm bulletproof. We're not. We're vaccinated. We may come down with COVID. With luck, we won't end up in the hospital. With luck, we won't end up dying. That's the point of the vaccination. So you've got to look at your organization and the amount of contact people have and decide what policy you want to put in place. You may want to send people home if they worked in close contact, if someone comes up with a positive test. And that's a little different from, I've seen some employees calling up and they said, oh, well, I know someone who knows someone who had COVID and I had lunch with that other person the other day, and they're trying to get a few days off of work. At some point, we can't just let everyone say, I have exposure, so I'm going to be home for 2 weeks. I'll see you 2 weeks from now. But if someone, if I went into work and I got a positive test the next day or ended up in the hospital, it might be legitimate if I had someone sitting in my office with me for them to have to get a negative test before they come back to work. And I believe they're saying you now have to wait at least 3 days after your exposure to get a test to have it be negative. I think it's changing all the time, but you've got to kind of look at that and see what you're going to do and try and keep that policy consistent. To go back to your first question, you started asking about the risks that you might have having employees in the audience who choose not to be vaccinated. And I mean, it's the same as with, except on a higher degree, the employees you have, say you have a flu clinic and you offer the flu vaccine to all your workers, and some people get it and some people don't. Obviously, you run the risk that they're going to bring in the virus. They could potentially infect other people. You would love to not have a situation be where your employment is the source of everyone coming into contact with it. I think that's a pretty high bar to meet. But it depends on what you do. Obviously, the state legislature has said if you're a healthcare provider or an emergency worker, we're going to assume if you get COVID, at least through December of this year, they're assuming that that's a workplace contagion. So you're looking at potential work comp claims if you work with people who are a healthcare environment type situation.
Mm-hmm.
You look at potential work comp claims anyway. If you can get someone who can prove they did absolutely nothing to go into your office, so your office is the only place they could have come down with that. I haven't seen a lot of those work comp claims yet.
Yeah.
which I'm happy, but there have been a few where people have said, well, I must have gotten it at work. And so,
Yeah. Because we're accommodating people like in a lot of different ways, right? A ton of different ways. And I'm just thoughtful of how does that taper down in a way that we go, this is not going to be like an accommodation the way that it's been for the last 12 months. I mean, I get the flu. I don't, it's not as severe as COVID. And maybe I'm just harsh thinking, when can we start to get back? Like we've got so many, everything's a reasonable accommodation now. It feels like, at what point do we go, either you're vaccinated or you're not? And here we go.
Or you can consider, either you're vaccinated or you come in wearing a mask. And if we see you without a mask, we're sending you home. Fair warning. I mean, it's really their choice. You say, here's what we require in our workplace environment, and here's why. You can say, we feel this way because we're coming into our clientele is a huge amount of at-risk people that we come into contact with on these home visits. Maybe that's a good reason. That's a good business justification reason for saying we're either going to have you wear a mask or you're going to be vaccinated.
So are you saying that it would be within reason to say, if you are not vaccinated, you must wear a mask? I'm wondering if that isn't like pointing people out too much, or
You can always say that. Always. Just like I said, the no shirt, no shoes, no service.
Yeah.
There's no law saying you can't require it, particularly if it makes sense. It doesn't make sense if my boss said that all the attorneys who have offices where we can shut our doors and nobody comes in have to have masks on while we're sitting in our closed-in office all by ourselves. That makes no sense. My boss said, hey, we want you coming in. We want you wearing a mask when you come in the front door. You can take it off when you're sitting at your desk with your closed door. If someone comes in to sit down and have a chat with you, sitting a foot away from you on the other side of your desk, please put your mask on. They haven't gone so far as to say you will be fired if you don't follow this. But if it's a strong enough reason in your workplace that it makes sense to do that, then that should be your plan. But like I said, if that's your plan, you have to treat your best employee as you would your worst employee. So you have someone who's an absolute anti-masker, will not get vaccinated. If you decide you're going to terminate that person, then you're terminating, the CEO if he doesn't follow the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You got to be consistent.
Makes sense.
Okay, good.
So many great questions about, just this whole world of vaccine. And it really is, this is like this stage, this current landscape of the pandemic. And there's other things going on too, right? There's the Family First Act, the new extension. And I also think that as things move along, organizations are really going to be looking at efficiencies and potentially maybe even some cost cutting, which is going to put them in some situations where they really have to be thoughtful about doing things legally, because payroll is always their largest expense. And so I don't know if anything outside of vaccine comes to mind for you in regards to the legal things that are being sort of elevated during the pandemic.
I have seen issues with employees, like I think I said before, where they're trying to work the COVID as a reason to not come into work. And I know Michelle, I think it was, had said something about, it seems like we're accommodating left and right. If you've got an attendance policy, I keep saying you've got to follow the attendance. You've got to keep following your policies. You've got to keep doing exactly what you say you're going to do, what you've got as a requirement. If you have a policy that an employee can't come back to work until they get you a negative test, if they've had an exposure, then they need to get that negative test. I am fighting with an attorney on a case right now. It's a work comp case, but she's been off on personal leave and then she had COVID exposure and she can't produce us with a legitimate negative test. Somehow she can take a picture of a medical report saying there was a negative result, but it doesn't have a date on it. It doesn't have the name of the person whose negative result it is. And I keep saying to him, she's not off work because of her work injury. We're not paying time loss. She's on a personal leave and she's not getting us the required documentation that we need to have to get her back to work. And he keeps fighting me and saying, you need to pay me her time loss benefits under work comp. And I keep saying, no, I don't. And that's the reality. You don't. If you still got this attendance policy, you've got, some sort of medical requirement when they're on personal leave, and COVID is a personal leave unless they work in certain areas of professions, as we talked about before, they have to bring you the proper documentation. You keep following those policies and treating the employees the way you need to. I saw a question, I think, from Judith saying, what can individual employers do if coworkers or employees don't require or follow the reasonable protections that they're asking for? You make it a policy. It's our ABC Corporation is going to have a policy, and here's what employees have to do. And then, like any other policy you have, don't drink when you're coming to work, or here's your attendance policy that you have to follow. They don't follow the policy, then you go to what are your requirements for disciplining employees that don't follow policy. If you have progressive discipline where you give them a verbal warning and a written warning, and then ultimately you terminate, you follow that. If you don't have that all written and done, then you want to make sure you keep it consistent with the degree of the violation. You keep it consistent with what you've done with other people in the past, and the golden rule that you've heard me say 3 times already today: you treat your best employee like your worst employee. You treat everyone the same. So if you want to be sticklers and say, look, you can either work here under these requirements that we have for your workplace safety, or you don't. Your choice. And then I do think it would be important, especially in this situation, like I said, keep checking in with the Department of Health website, keep seeing what their recommendations are, because at some point it makes no sense to say people have to wear masks 24/7 in the office if the Department of Health comes out and says, no, Minnesota, we're actually good.
Yeah.
We've got herd immunity now. We're in a pretty good place. We're lifting all restrictions. Then it may be time for you to consider, as a workplace environment, does it really make sense for us to keep having a mask requirement if that's what it is in place?
Yep. Yeah, excellent advice. I can't believe how quickly this conversation has gone in this hour, but we have just a couple minutes left with Erica. And for participants on this Zoom session, if we haven't touched on your question, now is a great time to ask it. Raise your hand or chat it. If you raise your hand, we'll unmute you. And we've covered a lot of ground, and I know people are really interested in this topic, and I think we've probably touched on quite a few questions.
Okay, I'm actually looking at the chat, and Judith and I believe Clara were talking about a question: what if an employer does not create policies? Does an employee have recourse in that case? Are there options for the employee? Yes and no. The employee is always free to go to the employer and say, here's what's going on in the workplace that I don't like. And I think you should encourage that. Obviously, employees are going to have different levels of comfort, just as we all do with our friends. We've all seen family members that have different levels of comfort with the exposure. The best thing that can happen is the employer has something in place, the employee knows what it is, the employer knows what it is. At some point, employees have to make a choice as to whether or not they're okay working in an environment that may not want to have a full-on policy, or doesn't feel like all the other employees there have to be masked. I think you can ask people to be respectful and stay a good distance away from you. I think employees should feel free to be able to move away. I'm not sure, Judith, in your situation, if the employee has options that they can be talked with about, if they don't want to eat in the lunchroom because other co-workers are not being respectful. Is there a table outside where they can go be outside in the fresh air as perhaps an alternative option? Or could you have a room or a place or a corner of a lunchroom area that could be designated as only people who wear masks can sit here? I mean, you want to try and balance everybody's interest, but if you as a company aren't going, if your company doesn't set up a policy where everyone has to wear masks, as an employee, you can't make that some sort of a requirement around you, but you can choose to say, I'm not comfortable sitting in a chair next to this person, I'm moving to the other end of the table, much like you might do at a family dinner if you had a family member come over who you did not think was being as respectful of the restrictions that you would like.
This is sort of a continuation of that question. We have a chat question that this organization has home service clients, and the clients only want a vaccinated worker in their home. And so I'm assuming the organization honors that.
Again, it would depend on what the business is and what the requirements are, and if they choose to do so. I don't know if the organization feels they have enough vaccinated volunteers or workers or whatever who can go in and meet that. If they feel they can meet that, that's their choice, and they could certainly try to do it. But that's kind of like if I choose to say that to someone I want to come in and clean the rugs and they say, sorry, we're not going to do it, then the ball's back in my court. I get to decide, do I want to keep working with them or not? And that's just the reality of where we are right now. Customers have the right to say, here's what I want. And if it's not what your business can meet, then it's not what your business can meet.
Yeah, it's a two-way street. Absolutely. Wow. Well, like I said, this hour went quickly, and we appreciate your taking the time today to talk to us and answer our questions. And we greatly appreciate your contributing your time and your subject matter expertise and what you've been through. I know it's a lot, and if it can do some good, maybe that helps a little bit.
That's what I'm hoping. I always feel bad when I'm sort of like, well, it depends, and it could change again, and in a month it could change.
Yeah.
So
I think we've had some great takeaways today, and it feels good too for us as a network to be together to realize that we're all making the best decisions we can, and we're in the same boat together for sure. And we can continue to bounce questions off each other. I mentioned at the beginning the Ask MACC platform that we have on our website. It's so easy for our members to just pop on there and shoot a quick question right when it comes to their mind, and that's a quick and easy way to get some more help. So join me in thanking Erica, and I want to thank everyone for being on today. And I also want to bring up that we've got a really great Zoom coming up later this month. So I just wanted to drop that into people's minds so they can save the time on May 27th from 1 to 2 again. We have Amy Koch from Hilden Advocacy and Law, and she's a political strategist. So this is a little bit of a shift, but she's going to come in and give us a little bit of a legislative debrief. So I think every organization should be interested in hearing from Amy, and she's going to look back at the session, talk about what happened, things of interest specifically to human service nonprofits, and also an update on the American Rescue Plan Act. Where is the money flowing? So I think we're all interested in learning about that. So again, save the date, May 27th at 1, and we'll have an invite coming out shortly for that. So this brings us to the closing of today's Zoom conversation, and we just really want to, again, extend our thanks to Erica and to all of you and our network, and this concludes our session today. So be well, and best wishes to everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, Laurel.
Thank you.